This video was made possible through the support of my patrons. Okay, so let's talk about the public perception of the Daleks before Doctor Who came back in 2005. When the Daleks were introduced in the show's second ever serial in 1963, they were an instant smash hit, and it's not hard to see why. These instantly iconic Pepperpots depicted in glorious black and white, created by Terry Nation, designed by Raymond Cusick, they were voiced by Peter Hawkins and David Graham, and the Daleks became pop culture icons. They featured in 2 movie adaptations starring Peter Cushing.
You have invaded the world of the Daleks!
Now you can see them in colour on the big screen, closer than ever before. So close, you can feel their fire.
Planet Earth has been bombarded by meteorites, subjected to cosmic rays, savagely invaded by men of steel who have no flesh to pierce, no blood to spill.
And within 4 years of their introduction, had featured in a further 5 serials, which saw them invade Earth, chase the Doctor throughout time and space, plot to conquer the universe, trick their way to power, and a supposed final appearance involving the Emperor Dalek. When looking at footage of these black and white serials, it's easy to see why the Daleks had such a profound influence on pop culture. Directors such as Richard Martin, Christopher Barry, Douglas Camfield and Derek Martinus shot the Daleks on film in such striking ways. Long takes, interesting angles, POV shots, shots which were designed from the ground up to be iconic and to cement the Daleks' legacy on TV. Due to the limitations of TV filming in the 1960s, the directors had to make sure that every shot counted, and they most certainly did when it came to shooting the cumbersome, clumsy Dalek props. But when we get to colour television in the 1970s and more location filming, we start to see the Daleks in a much more point-and-shoot approach. 5 years after the Daleks' last appearance, they made their colour debut in 1972's Day of the Daleks, in a rather underwhelming way. The Dalek design was starting to show its age, and the emphasis on location filming made it difficult to give the Daleks a presence, whereas the tailor-made studio sets and black and white environments of the 1960s gave directors the resources to experiment more. But that's not to say that the post-Dalek Mania Dalek stories lacked impact. Genesis of the Daleks helped take the Daleks back to their Nazi nightmare-inspired roots, but looking back on stories like Revelation of the Daleks, directed by one of Doctor Who's best directors, Graham Harper, the Daleks are the least visually interesting part of that story. This is how the Daleks are introduced in, say, Power of the Daleks.
Molly, babe, come in and meet the Daleks. What? The Daleks.
And here's how they're introduced in Revelation of the Daleks.
Remember that although I am playing swinging 60s sounds, you are in suspended animation. And we don't want to repeat of last time, now do we? Remember, over
Shut the fool up!
Expensive to replay.
It is the Doctor!
How times change. Despite a strong final showing in remembrance of the Daleks, throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, the Daleks were now relegated to a joke. A pop culture icon, yes, but mainly for mockery.
Exterminate! Exterminate! Exterminate!
However, it's worth noting that in the early 2000s, the Daleks were making a strong impression within the fan base for their Big Finish appearances. The audio-only stories show that the Daleks were still a narrative force to be reckoned with, which was helped by Nicholas Briggs's amazing vocal work and the audience's imagination filling in for the lack of visuals. It's with this in mind that we now come to 2005, when the Daleks were going to make their true 21st century debut. The audience were aware ahead of time that they would be returning due to trailer appearances, magazine cover spots, and the title of the episode is, well, Dalek. And with Dalek, we have the Doctor Who directorial debut of Joe Ahern, who would go on to also direct Father's Day, Boomtown, Bad Wolf and The Parting of the Ways. Joe's stellar run on Series 1 also netted him a BAFTA nomination for his work. Before working on Doctor Who, Joe Ahern had become a regular director of adult genre dramas, and would definitely fit the description of an auteur creator, as he would often direct scripts that he also wrote. For example, the 1997 drama This Life had a long list of writers such as Matthew Graham, who would go on to write the Doctor Who stories Fear Her and The Rebel Flesh, and also directors such as Sally Abrahamian, who joined the Series 11 team for Arachnids in the UK and The Witchfinders. However, Joe had the distinction of being the only person who worked on This Life to write and direct. And it's interesting looking back on Joe Ahern's career as a director, particularly how the style guidelines for This Life might have influenced his work. This Life, according to IMDb, has Joe's first professional media credit as a director, but he didn't start directing until episode 18, when the unique style of cinematography for the series was well established. The show's visual language takes a lot of getting used to, with a whipping camera, a heavy emphasis on the camera darting from props to actors, awkward close-ups, and completely ignoring scene geography, with very few establishing shots and some characters just popping up unannounced during scenes. This isn't me being critical here, by the way, this is just how the show is filmed. And after a while, you start to adjust to the unique rhythm of the programme, particularly the darting camera, which would later become a staple of Joe Ahern's work on Doctor Who. His next TV project was the Channel 4 vampire crime drama Ultraviolet, where he wrote and directed all 6 episodes. Also, random trivia, this show features a young Idris Elba years before he broke into the mainstream. Along with the genre change, the style of the show is wildly different to This Life, as Ahern broke away to do his own thing. There's a real emphasis on characters being the sole inhabitants of the frame. Even during conversation sequences, they are dominant until the camera cuts to the other actor, only very rarely going over the shoulder. It's fun to look back on Ultraviolet and its emphasis on actors as well as its zoom cuts, and seeing Ahern really develop as a director, we'd see handed more resources and a bigger budget for Doctor Who. Which nicely leads us to the TV movie Trance. No, not that one. In fact, that movie is a remake of this 2001 TV movie which Joe Ahern wrote and directed, and whilst Joe is a credited screenwriter of the 2013 remake, that was directed by Danny Boyle. But this TV movie sees Ahern reining in his stylistic tropes, but with the echoes still there, an emphasis on POV, single characters dominating the frame, etc. But we start to see a further emphasis on the actors that we'll see in his Doctor Who work, where even if characters aren't saying anything in the scene, the camera will still cut to them to get across their reactions. Watching this scene of the main characters in trance during a therapy session, I genuinely got flashbacks to a scene in Dalek when the cast are talking in an elevator. Different format and scope, but Ahern is an auteur, alright. And lastly, we have the 2-part mockumentary TV series called Space Odyssey: Voyage to the Planet, which he co-created with famed astronomer Christopher Riley. Due to it being a mockumentary, conventional filming styles more or less just go out the window, so there isn't much to contribute here, though you can tell that Ahern loved putting cameras in the astronauts' helmets so he could get point of view shots. But I think it's worth bringing up for multiple reasons. 1, Dalek has an Easter egg from Space Odyssey in it, so we'll get to that later. 2, it has Colin Stinton in it, who played the President of the United States in The Sound of Drums, so that's something. And 3, I bought all of these DVDs and watched all of them for this video, so I was not going to let that time go to waste, though seriously, I do recommend Space Odyssey. It's a really great and narratively ambitious educational mockumentary series. Anyway, we have a director here who has worked on low-budget dramas, genre material including horror and sci-fi, with a distinct creative flair, so I think it's time we move on to the main event, and that's his first Doctor Who story. But before we get started, it's time to clarify what this series is about. I will not be talking about the narrative elements of Dalek, and this series is about the visual storytelling and the creative decisions that get the script written by Robert Shearman in front of audiences. Also, while I can generally talk about the basics of visual storytelling, not everything I say in this video is going to be 100% the intent behind the shot, so my word is hardly gospel, I am mainly interpreting. Which is why, for this video, I brought in a little bit of help.
My name's Joe Ahern, and I was one of the directors on the first series of Doctor Who in 2005. I directed 5 of the episodes with Christopher Eccleston.
Ladies and gentlemen, join me and Dalek director Joe Ahern as we break down Dalek shot by shot. My first question is, because this is going to be part of the a Doctor Who shot by shot series that I've started doing, talking about the visual storytelling of a particular well-regarded episode of Doctor Who. A lot of people who watch my videos say that they want to get into storytelling or filmmaking or TV making, and Doctor Who is one of their influences. But what I'd like to ask is, what were your influences which took you to the career that you currently have?
Doctor Who?
Yeah.
Doctor Who, Jerry Anderson, and Hammer horror films and Marvel comics. So they were really all my kind of storytelling influences. So not Shakespeare, not theatre, not kind of not English literature stuff. Really kind of mainstream visual entertainment. But I mean, my period was probably John Pertwee going into Tom Baker. So they were my doctors, if you like. But in terms of like what really got under my skin, it was probably when I was a really, really young child, seeing some episodes of Patrick Troughton, when I shouldn't have done because they were probably too scary. And I had to find out much later on what it was. I think it was something called The Mind Robber, which was a very surreal episode of, I think, 60s Doctor Who, where they had kind of fictional characters and went into a very strange universe. And I suppose the other ones would be the Cybermen. I do remember having nightmares about the Cybermen coming in through the corner of my bedroom and stuff like that. So I think it was almost before I really understood what storytelling was or any of that some of the images just sort of got burned in.
As we properly delve into this static opening shot, I think it's also appropriate to talk about the lead up to this 6th episode of Series 1, as I think the two are just forever linked. The episode opens with a beautiful wide shot of the 9th Doctor's TARDIS landing in the Space Museum. There's a lot to unpack here already, and I'm not just talking about what a lovely detail it is to have the TARDIS reflected in one of the glass displays on the right of the frame as it fades in and out of view. It really gives the TARDIS a sense of place within the environment. The TARDIS is centre frame as the BBC logo fades in, making the TARDIS and the BBC almost one and the same. The TARDIS and the BBC are British institutions, and I love how the two appear in this opening shot in harmony, especially since Dalek is such an important episode. From Rose to World War III, the audience have gotten a handle on the tone and style of the series, but there's a chance that the unconverted are tuning into Dalek as their first exposure to Series 1 due to their curiosity about the Daleks. As a result, in my mind, it makes sense that this important episode opens with a static, almost basic yet polished shot of the most iconic prop of this series, with the BBC being represented here as well. When shooting the episode, did you know consciously whether or not it would be a secret, or did you treat it like that anyway?
I suspect that we knew by then that it wasn't going to be a secret, because even back then, I mean, we didn't have Twitter, obviously we had the internet, but it wasn't anything like what it was now. It is just next to impossible to keep secrets. Having said that, they did manage to do it. My hat's off to them in, I think it was the 4th series when they did that fake regeneration with David Tennant, where he gets hit by a Dalek and you think he's going to regenerate. But it gets so difficult because there's just a small portion of people who just, they want spoilers, and it's really hard to, you'd end up cutting your nose off to spite your face. In order not to do it. There's also, of course, the element of publicity, because part of it is fighting people who want to get all that stuff out. But also, you do have the fear with every episode that goes out, you want people to watch it. And do you really want to, take the risk that people aren't going to turn up for the Dalek episode because they don't know there's a Dalek in it? Because they always, from my understanding, they'd always wanted the Dalek to be a big splash mid-season. So, just when the first burst of excitement was tailing off after it came back, you hit them with the Daleks halfway through and get them all excited again. We faced the same thing at the end of episode 11, I think it was, Boomtown, where, do we introduce the Daleks again, that they're coming back at the end? At the end, it was just decided, I think, more for commercial reasons. It's the finale, we want to give it the best chance possible that people will come to it.
As the Doctor and Rose leave the TARDIS, they are framed in close-up, and while Rose's attention is on the Doctor's mind is elsewhere as he ponders the distress signal they received. The Doctor is not looking in Rose's direction, and the two do not share the frame, suggesting a disconnect between the two, and the two are not framed together until the Doctor turns the lights on and the size and the scope of the alien museum is communicated through a wide shot, which cuts to an extreme wide as the place keeps growing and growing, getting across the vast size of the complex. We get panning close-ups of the exhibits, which I think are POV shots, as we look at the stuffed Slitheen arm which Rose recognises. We can also already see the reflection of the classic Cyberman helmet in the background, which newcomers to the series might not even consider, but classic series fans will immediately recognise it. And then the prop demands audience attention when the Doctor spots it. The two sections of the fandom get represented here. We have a shot from Rose's perspective looking at a new villain, and a shot from the Doctor's perspective looking at an old villain. What I especially love about this nostalgic moment of reflection is literally the reflection. As the Doctor steps towards the glass, the way the shot is framed depicts the Cyberman helmet perfectly fitting on top of the Doctor's shoulders. The Doctor trips an alarm, and we have this cool panning shot of security running in behind these metal bars, which just helps to make this entrance look more dynamic, and I particularly like this shot of a security guard pointing his gun screen right, with the screen being broken up by a corner of a glass frame, before cutting to a Doctor smiling towards screen left, which takes us to the opening credits, before going to a shot from the ground of a black helicopter coming in for a landing.
The first shot of Dalek, in the script, you're in a big aircraft hangar and you're looking up at the ceiling, and the ceiling is, I think, a metal ceiling with a big, gigantic poster or banner of Von Straten, right? And that roof splits into two, and a helicopter comes down and lands between it. That was the first shot as per Robert Sherman's script. And as soon as I read it, I said, well, we're just not going to be shooting that. Can we just not bother with that? And again, Russell said, no, we know we're going to have to cut things, but you cut it at the last moment. You don't just say it immediately, well, we aren't going to afford that. So we storyboarded it, looked into it, and as it happens, that was too expensive, and we didn't film it. So a lot of things drop out in pre-production. By the time you shoot it, you've usually got a sense, because even at that time, back in 2004-05, I'd done quite a lot of CGI, prosthetics, special effects, explosions, green screen, that kind of stuff. So I know how long things take. So as a director, I know this isn't very sexy, but I always think that maybe half the job is time management, because particularly on TV, if you don't manage your time efficiently, you are going to end up screwing up scenes.
We next cut to a shot starting at the feet of security guards before making their way up their bodies as they stand to attention against a wall, establishing these supporting artists by their profession first as opposed to giving them actual characteristics. And what follows is pure conjecture on my part. I unfortunately forgot to ask Joe about his influences here, but with the American officials discussing business and walking down this narrow corridor, this feels very The West Wing. This episode was in production in mid-2004, so the looming influence of one of America's biggest TV shows was still very much present in pop culture. In fact, in 2005, the same year that Dalek came out, even Family Guy was parodying its long-take corridor shots. And while Doctor Who's production schedule or budget for Series 1 would never be able to pull off something like this, I think it's fair to assume this shot was inspired by the way the West Wing shot its lengthy corridor sequences. With the exception of the reverse shot establishing Diana Goddard's introduction, the camera remains in front of these marching characters. We then cut to a POV shot of the Dalek from a fisheye lens. However, it's only looking at the door to the room before panning to the right to look at Simmons. It's a gradual reveal throughout the shot. Firstly, we know that this is not a human perspective. Then as the camera moves, you can tell that this is a POV shot. Then as it settles on Simmons, you can see what's happening to it in that scene. Three things communicated in one shot over time. Now, this scene where the Doctor and Rose meet Henry Van Statten for the first time is really interesting, mainly because it feels like nothing that's come before in Series 1, and it's here where you start to get a sense of Joe Ahern's style. Normally, the proxemics of the characters, basically their placement on set and how they're framed together, would get across their relationship to one another. For example, you wouldn't want to shoot a romantic scene where the two leads aren't in the same frame, but conversely, if characters are at odds with each other or conflicted towards each other, it helps to separate them between the cuts to get a sense of their distance. However, Joe Ahern gives these characters a distance regardless of their relation to each other. This could have been inherited from Joe's earlier work on This Life, where there's an emphasis on props and single shots of characters, which feels appropriate considering this scene starts with the Doctor and Van Statten handling an alien musical instrument. Even when Van Statten moves closer to the Doctor and Rose by coming around the table, he rarely shares the frame with them. The emphasis for the most part is placed entirely on the actors and their delivery of their lines, and you can see this stylistic choice implemented throughout Ahern's later work, like Father's Day and Parting of the Ways. This approach will not work with every project, but when you have actors this good, dialogue this witty and fast-paced, it allows the cast to get a moment to shine even when they're not really talking much in the scene, with some funny reaction shots, like this one of Rose when Van Statten tells Adam to look after her, and this smirk from the Doctor when Van Statten notices that Rose is English. This shot lasts only 23 frames, that is less than a second. Joe Ahern is clearly a director who just loves framing actors in his shots and making sure that their idiosyncrasies get captured and communicated, and if his approach towards doing that is to make them the sole subject of the frames, then I'm completely down with that.
There's a famous Hollywood actor who, I can't remember who it was, he said something to the effect of, some directors confuse being your director with being your boss. And I do not consider myself being the boss of the actors or the boss of the performances. I'm there to help them and to answer questions. And, you know, if they've maybe misunderstood something, to explain it or whatever and try and help. I'm not of this school that believes the director kind of drags the performance out of the actors. They did all that very happily by themselves. And I hope that I helped them, and I hope that I, you know, didn't get in their way. A lot of the director's job with acting is getting out of the actor's way, really, and just making sure that they're comfortable and they feel safe, because they're doing potentially ridiculous and silly things, and you only buy the stories to the extent that they buy it. So as a director, you're just trying to create the environment that really allows them to do that and that allows them to play. Having said all that about actors, and I love actors, and it is all about actors, I love it also when actors shut up and you can do something with the camera. The reason why Doctor Who is such a gift for directors is that on most telly, and even a lot of film, directors aren't always firing on all cylinders, because either, you know, sometimes things are just performance pieces. I say just performance, they're principally performance pieces, and you work with the actor and you whatever, and that's great, it'll be fine. With Doctor Who, you get everything, because it really is all singing and dancing. You get, you know, hopefully some great acting, some kind of moving scenes, but you also get some great visual scenes. So I just love any scenes where the camera is telling you some things, as well as, not just instead of, but as well as the actors. So, I mean, on a boring, obvious level, you know, things like the, you know, some of the shootouts and some of the fight scenes, or even something simple like when he first goes into the museum and he sees the Cyberhead. The kind of visual language that I like very much is, it's nothing particularly kind of new or risque. It's the Hitchcock film language, where you put the camera exactly where the actor is, and you show exactly what the character is perceiving. And what happens a lot in television and film is, like, the camera is over someone's shoulder, or it's sort of over there filming the actors. And what I really like is when you do that as well, obviously, but you put the camera exactly where the actor is. So, for example, when he comes, it's a small moment, but when he comes and sees the Cyberhead, he's walking towards it, and you put the camera exactly where he is, which means not just a cutaway of the Cyberhead, but you're tracking slowly towards the Cyberhead, you know, from the Doctor's point of view. And when he's looking into the Cyberhead's eyes, it's just a nice visual moment.
But that's not to say that this scene doesn't have interesting shots in it. I love this low angle of Van Statten and Adam studying the alien tech with this garish, looming painting of Van Statten above him. This shot says so much about this guy's character visually and how he views himself, that he would have this absurdly huge piece of art of himself behind his own desk. My only nitpick about this scene is how Van Statten gets from his desk to the exit. We see him exit screen right, so he should walk behind the Doctor as he turns over his right shoulder, but we don't see him, and then in the next shot he's just by the door. How'd he get there? Anyway, we cut to Simmons adjusting his equipment. That came out wrong, before the camera pans to the right to show members of security before the ensemble enter the set. Joe Ahern does love a dynamic pan, but more on that later. Before the Doctor enters the vault, there is a great cutaway shot of Goddard and the security guard behind her smiling to themselves when the Doctor says that he won't touch the Metaltron. The Doctor steps off camera left, before the episode cuts to one of my favourite shots of not only this episode, but Series 1 in general. Not only do you have this frame within a frame, as you have this perfectly aligned square in the centre, but the lighting from the other room leaking into this dark cage is perfectly judged, as our hero walks quite literally into darkness. There is a lot to be gleaned about how the entire tone of Series 1 changes after Dalek, with the characters going through much more intense and personal emotions, and how the Doctor himself changes after this encounter, and I think this shot perfectly represents that. This is, in my opinion, the shot when Series 1 changes. And I could spend another entire video talking about just this scene, the most important scene of the episode, where the 9th Doctor confronts the Dalek for the first time, but first we have to talk about how incredible the lighting is, with the Doctor partially lit on the right of the frame, but the whole top left of the frame is covered in blackness, with the only light being the blue eye stalk of what is later revealed to be the Dalek. Those who have no idea what they're in for will be intrigued, but those who already know that it's a Dalek still have a few more seconds before the grand reveal.
Look, I'm sorry about this. Mr. Van Statten might think he's clever, but never mind him. I've come to help. I'm the Doctor. Impossible.
The suspense is terrible. He's gonna go this time. I hope it'll last.
When he first goes in, and it's a completely dark room, and the first time you see it's Dalek is when it speaks and the flashing lights come on. I had to, turn a lot of lights on from the set. I remember having chats with the production, with the lighting designer, Ernie Vince, who was obviously trying to keep it bright and colourful and, had taken that note. And I was kind of saying, well, in this one, it really has to be pitch black, because otherwise the Doctor will see it as soon as he comes in. So you can't have it just a little bit dark. It's got to be pitch black. And so we spent a lot of time on that, turning lights off.
The initial reveal of the Dalek actually mirrors the shots of the Doctor as he realises what is going on. We have a mid-shot of the Doctor stating his name, a wide shot of the Dalek echoing his name, a close-up of the Doctor, a close-up of the Dalek, and then an extreme close-up of the Doctor before the lights flicker on and announce the Dalek to the world, with a close-up which pans out to a wide before whipping around to reveal the Doctor clawing at the door. Before this unfolded, we transitioned into this scene through the monitor that Van Statten and Diana are looking at, and now that the Dalek is revealed, we transition backwards through that screen to see their reaction. We even get a POV shot of the Dalek looking at the door, a shot similar to the first POV that confirms that this is indeed the creature we saw being tortured earlier. This probably ranks as one of the greatest ever Dalek reveals in the show's history. In the 1960s, great care was given to how the Daleks would first appear in their stories, such as the Daleks coming out of the water in the Dalek Invasion of Earth, the Doctor discovering the cobweb-covered ones in Power of the Daleks, and even their iconic first appearance. But then in the 1970s, it's a real mixed bag. For every sinister first showing, like the weapons test in Genesis of the Daleks, you would sometimes just have them show up in Day of the Daleks or Revelation of the Daleks. No build-up or thoughts, just there's the Daleks. Or you'd get the best of both worlds. You'd get awkward entrances like in Destiny of the Daleks or Resurrection of the Daleks, where they would just smash through a wall and then proceed to just shout a lot. And don't even get me started on their introduction in Death to the Daleks.
The Earth creatures are to be exterminated. Fire at my command.
Wait a minute, wait, you can't!
Total extermination. Fire, fire, fire.
Once the Doctor realises its weaponry is useless, the camera frees up somewhat as Eccleston decides to make the space in the cage his own. He rushes at the Dalek before the camera rotates around as he starts circling it. I love this wide shot of the Dalek chained up and helpless as the Doctor walks around.
I will always storyboard things in anything that I do, but I don't necessarily share that with the actors unless they want me to, because again, they're in charge of the performance. I might have an idea of how an actor's going to move or where they're going to go, but I'm not going to impose it on them. I'm going to see what they want to do first. And, 90% of the time, it'll probably be the same as I've guessed, because a lot of it is just logic and whatever. But it's important that the actors are in control of that. So, for example, when we did that scene with Chris and the Dalek, it's a very long scene, and, I thought it might need some movement, so I was thinking that maybe the Doctor should walk around the Dalek and harangue him or whatever. And Chris said, well, I'm not sure, maybe I just want to stand here and, be solid and whatever. So I said, great. So we did a few takes like that, and then we tried walking around the Dalek. We tried lots of different things. We went very far in some points, where I think at some point he was called up into a ball with fear, and that's, I think, why for me that scene is so good, is because we explored a lot of options and everybody felt that they were having a good go at it, and we hope we get the best out of everyone.
I love how right up in the actors' faces the camera gets. Well, I say actors as if the Dalek is one in this scene, but you know what I mean. But we get some uncomfortable close-ups of Eccleston screaming at the eye stalk, and also these extreme close-ups of the Dalek, with only the tip of the eye stalk in focus before it cuts to the Dalek's POV, as the Doctor announces that he destroyed the Daleks in the Time War. The fisheye lens of the Dalek really gives Eccleston a deformed appearance as he makes this gloating statement. The Doctor goes through an intense emotional arc in this story, and this shot helps to sum up how close the Doctor is to just stepping over the morally ambiguous line. Even the Doctor realises what is happening to him, so he steps away into another extreme close-up of the Dalek out of focus and in the background. While Eccleston is easily the most dominant presence in the frame, he is not acting alongside an ordinary person. He is acting alongside a Dalek with a big blue eye and with additional lights which shine every time it speaks, so even though Eccleston is at the forefront, the Dalek still commands attention in the background. Also, side note, damn is Eccleston just acting his heart out in this scene.
And the coward survived.
Oh, and I caught your little signal. Help me, poor little thing.
But there's no one else coming, because there's no one else left.
I am alone in the universe.
Yep.
So are you. We are the same.
When you're doing a show like Doctor Who, which is technically very complicated, the danger is, and I've made these mistakes, in the past, where you've given all the time to, say you want someone to jump out of a window. Well, that's stunts and that's safety and that's wires, it's all sorts of stuff. It might take half a day or however many hours. And just because it's something simple that looks simple, like, an actor having a breakdown over a cup of coffee or something, we'll say, oh, well, we can do that really quickly in half an hour. Well, you might be able to, but the actor is doing something really difficult. And it's just trying to keep a balance between the emotional requirements and the and the technical requirements. And that first scene with the Doctor and the Dalek, for example, everyone knew it was a big deal. It was a big deal, because if it didn't work, all fandom would have murdered us. So the biggest directing decision I made on that was to make sure there was a whole day to do it and there was enough time. One of the things that I found, and this is very much when I'm directing my own work, what I look for when I'm working with actors, what I really love is when an actor does something and I thought, I had no idea that it was going to be that, but it's obviously that. So, and that's what really great actors do. They interpret the scene and give it back to you in a way that you didn't know that you wanted or didn't, hadn't really imagined. And I think some people, also as a director, because you've got very little time and whatever, and you don't have time to try a lot of scenes a lot of different ways. Sometimes you get scared when things come back at you that aren't what you expected. But that's when things are really kind of buzzing, I think.
When the Doctor yanks down the switch electrifying the Dalek, the bright white lighting in the room gives the audience a whole new perspective of this Doctor. The smile he gives the Dalek whilst under the lighting is genuinely unnerving. We've seen the Doctor do morally ambiguous things before, but that was portrayed entirely through the actor's performance and the text of the script. In Dalek, maybe for the first time in the show's 42-year history, we're seeing it portrayed through atmosphere and lighting. It's something else. Just a few episodes ago, we saw a fun and happy Eccleston.
Alright, lad. How's it going, mate? Alright, lad. Yeah, I can see that. You on the front last night, lad. That Billy Piper.
And now...
Why should I? You never did.
We even have a visual contrast with the Doctor entering the vault at the beginning, looking at the torture tools in a sympathetic light, to the ending, where the Doctor has now become the torturer.
a lot of people would have got a lot of their major notes in the first block, right? So they would have, first of all, they'd have had their months of pre-production working out how they wanted to be, and then they would have shot for a few weeks and decide they like this and don't like that and have dialed it up and dialed it down. So I was in a very happy position when I came in episode 6, and they'd been doing it for months, to a lot of that had settled down. I didn't often have to say a lot to Ernie because I would... I've got a clear idea of where I want the camera to be and how I want to shoot it in terms of the montage. He's there to do kind of the lighting. And I think one of the biggest, I'm guessing it because I wasn't there, but I'm guessing one of the biggest notes for him was this thing to make sure these might not be, Russell or Phil or Julie's words, but, it's a family show, right? So it can't be, you're not making like a dark, sinister, science fiction thing. It's supposed to be fun and embracing all that kind of stuff. So if you look at the first series, it's for quite a few series, it's quite bright and the colours pop. They did a lot with the grading as well after shooting to really exaggerate, the colours and to make it quite hot and quite approachable. And as a jobbing director coming into that, that's the house style, and that's what you embrace. Having said that, I was often trying to claw it back a bit to being more my natural sensibility, which is, apparitions of vampires and ultraviolet and kind of horror stuff. And Dalek, there was never any tension about that, and no one said on Dalek, no, you're making it too dark or you're making it too this, because the story really lent itself to that. It was a darker story, so it was it was a happy happy marriage in that way. But no, Ernie was great. Mostly the only kind of things that I tried to do was on occasion to slightly go against the house style by turning a few lights off.
Okay, so we're 10 minutes into this 45-minute episode, and I've written almost 4,000 words, and my current audio recording for this video is 33 minutes long, so I'm going to need to speed things up a bit. We get a massive change of pace with this establishing shot of Adam's office as we get a Steadicam shot, which is almost 30 seconds long to open the scene. It's easily the longest single take of the episode, and it does a great job of bringing the mood and tone down to something a bit more subdued after this. After some British flirty banter, I really like this transition with Rose exiting camera left and Adam looking off in that direction. Then we cut to the Doctor, Diana and Van Statten entering the elevator from camera right. The momentum and movement drives us into the next scene smoothly. Despite the cramped environment, the framing of these elevator shots still frames the actors separately for the most part. We do have a medium wide of all of the actors, but that's mainly so that Diana can move to screen left and then she gets her own camera setup devoted to her. This wide shot is directly in service of setting up the actors to get a close-up later on, and we even see this done again in the torture chamber where the Doctor is imprisoned. At first we mainly have close-ups of the actors' faces before we have a medium wide of Van Statten and the X-ray machine, but this shot is only a medium wide just so that the actor can step forward into a close-up moments later. The lighting is also really distinct in this scene, with a lot of shades of deep reds and sickly blues, which gives a nice visual distinction between the Doctor and Van Statten during their conversation, almost akin to Joe's work on Ultraviolet years before. As Rose is taken to see the Dalek by Adam, the titular Dalek is introduced in this scene via a point-of-view shot from Rose's perspective, giving the audience a visual understanding of the sympathetic portrayal of the Dalek that Rose has throughout the rest of the episode.
Billie Piper, Rose, has got as much to do with that episode as kind of anybody else, because it's very much the contrast between the Doctor's reaction to the Dalek and her reaction to the Dalek, and how her reaction to the Dalek really humanises, both the Doctor and also literally the Dalek, because some of their DNA gets into the Dalek. So to me, that story is kind of like a triangle. But no, I mean, I can't remember anyone having trouble with relating to the Dalek on set. Nick, the voice, was always just kind of around the corner. And again, we spent a fair amount of time with Nick as an actor, with Chris and Billy doing the scenes and doing the lines, and not trying to get the technology and the, what's it called, the transmogrifier or the voice modulator, trying not to let that get in the way of the Dalek is a character, just like the Doctor and Rose. I think that's one of the things that's different from the old series. I'm not sure there were ever any Daleks in the old series that was really treated as a character. They were just killing machines. And in this one, they had really proper, fairly long, sustained conversations with each other. So it's just like any other character, really.
After Rose touches the casing, the Dalek breaks free with a glorious shower of sparks and Murray Gold's choir working full force. We also get this great shot of the Doctor from a high, uncomfortable angle, which implies a woozy feeling that the Doctor is experiencing after the torture, followed by an extreme, defiant close-up. The Dalek breaks free, sucks Simmons' face off and starts draining the base. Similar to the establishing shot we saw earlier of Adam's office, this Steadicam shot starts off wide and moves in close, except this shot is the whole scene. I love how the transparent nature of the screen means we see a back-to-front version of what the characters are seeing, yet still being able to see the cast. Another Van Statten office scene opens with Goddard, pans to the Doctor and Van Statten before panning back to Goddard. Even the next shot opens with soldiers running towards the Metatron cage, before whip panning to Rose, Adam and DiMaggio running past them. Very reminiscent of Ahern's camera work on This Life. Even though the music is fast-paced, there's a wonderful few shots of stillness and anticipation before the Dalek shows up. First, we have Commander Bywater running through first, giving instructions. The Dalek starts to enter the frame before we zoom in on its weaponry, and then...
I love the first extermination in Dalek. An actor called John Schwab, who I'd worked with before a few years ago, a couple of years before on Space Odyssey, this docudrama that I did. I was very keen to get like real Americans to play the Americans. So that scene where he runs out of the corridor and gets zapped from behind by the Dalek, it's the first time we've seen the Dalek extermination effect in the 21st century. And in the original series, I seem to remember it's black and white negative, and we spent a bit of time with the CGI people working out something that was kind of faithful to that, but in colour. So I went with these kind of blue and green tones, and it's terribly satisfying when you see that effect brought up to date. I mean, if I was left to my own terrible devices, I would have liked to have seen bones splintering and all sorts of other things, but, it's a family show, we can't do that. So I like that very much.
200 personnel dead, and all because of you, sir. Well,
you say 200 soldiers. I remember Russell telling me before shooting that, now you can make 30 soldiers look like 200, can't you? I said, no, not really. Maybe you can make them look like 50 or 60. I'll do my best. Yeah, I quite liked having a big body count. I liked Linda with a Y's death in Parting of the Ways as well. That's the one where she's just on an observation platform and the Daleks come up behind her outside the glass, and you see them say exterminate, so you see their lights flash, and you know what they're saying, but you can't hear it because there's a vacuum. Then they zap the glass out, and she gets moided. I quite like that one. The more sympathetic the person is, the better the death scene, really. I mean, I loved also Rose's father's death, and Sean Dinmore in Father's Day. That was he had a great death.
In this montage of death, we see the Dalek wipe out this entire corridor of guards with pure efficiency. No shot is wasted, and in terms of its direction, no two deaths are shot in the same way, despite the manner of death being identical.
I think I also love the extermination effects, not just the first one, but the fight in the corridor where various people are getting exterminated, but you do it on things like, I think you see some hands holding a gun, and the hands get fried, And again, that's the Hitchcock thing of once you've seen someone full body being blown off their feet by a blast, you've seen that, and it's therefore no longer effective. So you try and find different details that hopefully communicate the same thing, but also keep your eye refreshed.
Once the dust has settled, we get a brilliant low shot of the Dalek surrounded by corpses. This is an intimidating shot of the Dalek, and it's the type of shot that we've seen before. If you take away the voice, the Dalek prop on its own isn't particularly frightening, so it's important that you photograph it in an effective way to give it presence in the frame and make it feel powerful. Philip Hinchcliffe, one of the show's producers during the early 1970s, knew this back in the classic series.
When we see a Dalek, let's not just see this pepper pot trundling on the studio floor. Let's get low angles and let's make it powerful. Let's find a way of, making it appear more powerful than it really is when you look at it on the studio floor trundling around.
Because I wasn't involved in the first block of filming, which is where a lot of those decisions are made, in pre-production for the first block, a lot of those things were decided well before I came on board, and the Dalek was one of those. But once the designs started to come back and once the Dalek started getting built, I had a few things to say about it. I mean, I was obsessed about, everybody was obsessed about trying to undercut what were the unfair jokes about Daleks, and some of, the old Doctor Who's lack of budget, for example. So I was very keen that the Dalek really was kind of substantial and, felt like a tank and was kind of very credible as a killing machine. So these are kind of minimal things, but I mean, I asked the designer to put some more detail on things like the sucker, you know, so rather than it just being looking like a smooth bit of rubber kind of thing, you know, it's got grooves on it so that it can sustain close-ups. That's one of the things that you didn't have so much on the earlier Doctor Who. You didn't use quite so much film language because a lot of it was shot in studios and, you know, almost a kind of as live, and you can't really do cinematic montage in that kind of environment. So I wanted to do a lot of big close-ups, and, you know, to have big close-ups, you've got to have a lot of detail in there. So there was that. Things would go back and forth. For example, they'd, you know, originally the Dalek came back with blue flashing lights on its head, you know, and I thought that might look like an ambulance. So I asked, could it be white? You know, I think there was discussion about what colour the Dalek was going to be. Well, at one point, it was going to be red because, you know, I think there were red Daleks in the Peter Cushing movie. So, you know, we ended up on bronze. But in terms of the actual design of it, the way it looks, that's really nothing to do with me. That's very much what Russell, Phil, Julie, and Ed were designing well before I came on board. So I really kind of fritted around the edges, if you like.
I think now is a good time to talk about the Dalek itself in this episode, because it feels like every move it makes is methodical and very deliberate. It doesn't move somewhere it doesn't need to go. It doesn't fire a shot that it intends to miss. It doesn't look at something unless it's important to its end goal. It's almost balletic in the way it effortlessly dispatches of the humans in this episode, and it's eerie in its frequent stillness. A stillness that was actually rolled back on in future episodes.
I was obsessed again about making them look really solid and heavy. And one of the difficulties about the Dalek is that as soon as it moves, as soon as it has even any slight bump in the floor, the gun will wobble or the eye stalk will wobble, and it just looks, for me anyway, it just looks terrible. So you spend a lot of time trying to make, or I tried to make the moments, the movement of the Dalek look really robotic, really solid, really precise. You know, to the extent that sometimes we put the Dalek itself on a dolly in order to make it really smooth. And in fact, I think, you know, I went a little bit too far in that design because, you know, Russell reminded me between doing Dalek and Bad Wolf, you'll notice the Dalek movement changes a bit because Russell really wanted, although it's a killing machine and it's a kind of a suit of armour, if you like, there's also a living creature inside that. And he wanted me, you know, in the last two episodes to try and make sure that the Daleks were, you know, always kind of twitching somehow with rage. And if you look at the Daleks in the last two episodes, you'll see that the eye stalks are occasionally kind of twitching and moving, and like they're almost sort of, you know, inside the creature's like boiling with rage and can't contain itself. So you'll see that, but that's different. You see from like it bumping if it hits an obstruction or if it goes over a bump. These are kind of deliberate emotional things. So the language was always kind of evolving. There was always a lot of back and forth between people about what, you know, what worked and what didn't.
Our next big moment is the Dalek elevating up the stairs. What I love about how this moment is depicted is that it's actually pretty basic. This shot of the Dalek from a high angle demonstrates a rather weak side to the Dalek. The audience is thinking it, the characters are thinking it.
Stairs. That's more like it. Hasn't got legs, it's stuck.
Great big alien death machine, defeated by a flight of stairs.
When the Dalek elevates, however, it's still shown through that same weak angle for a moment. The statement speaks for itself. Despite what the audience and characters think from atop their high perch, the Dalek will conquer those preconceived notions and make its way up those stairs and kill you. That high shot, over the course of a minute, turns from a shot of the characters lording over the pathetic Dalek to an intimidating shot of the Dalek approaching, and you are powerless to stop it. Compare this to the ending of Part 1 of Remembrance of the Daleks. The scene is so darkly lit, the camera so close, the red elevating effects are so vague that it's hard to tell that the Dalek is actually elevating through its own means. Now, I love that story, and I love that cliffhanger, but there is a reason that after this scene in 1988, general audiences still did not know that the Daleks could conquer stairs until 2005, 17 years later. This scene, in comparison, is more brightly lit. The movements are slower. We even get a shot from underneath the Dalek showing that it is doing this itself. The shots are matter of fact and static. This is the Dalek conquering the ridicule, and I love it. I also love this shot of Rose and Adam running down the corridor with DiMaggio's scream in the background. The moving camera emphasises that the chase is now officially on, and that these two have no proper defence against the Dalek now. We return to Van Statten's office, a much darker room by comparison, and the edits and choice of zooms in this dialogue sequence are just sublime.
If you're so impressive, then why not just reason with this Dalek? It must be willing to negotiate. There must be something it needs. Everything needs something.
What's the nearest town?
Salt Lake City.
Population?
1 million.
All dead. If the Dalek gets out, it'll murder every living creature. That's all it needs.
But why would it do that?
Because it honestly believes they should die. Human beings are different, and anything different is wrong. It's the ultimate in racial cleansing. And you, Van Statten, you've let it loose!
It's not only quick and pacey, but it gets across Van Statten's thought process. Throughout this exchange, the Doctor is only ever framed in close-up, whereas the scene starts with Van Statten in a mid-shot, and it's not until he starts to be convinced by the Doctor that the camera comes in close. Van Statten is now coming to the Doctor's way of thinking.
The editor is one of the biggest kind of inputs into the directing and the storytelling. I used to be an editor myself. That was my kind of training. I came up through post-production, so I edited documentaries and dramas and whatever. So I'm very, very interested in the editing process. So the editor is really important to me.
Well, like, you've frequently collaborated with Graham before, like on Doctor Who and Apparitions and The Replacement. So did you get to actually choose your editor for the stories that you were directing, or was that just a pure coincidence?
No, I would have chosen. No, it wouldn't have been coincidence. I mean, they must have asked, yeah.
And this next scene has the Dalek versus security, but before we get to that, let's take a look at how the Commander is framed at the beginning of the scene. Brightly lit, with a powerful posture, and very much alive, and then obscured by the railing, darkly lit, and, well, dead. First of all, we have the Dalek coming into the room and looking directly at Rose Tyler, and now that this point of view shot is an actual plot point, I think now is a good time to talk about Joe Ahern's love of point of view shots.
Well, this goes back again to my obsession with Hitchcock, which is that point of view is everything, visual point of view. So, and it's not used enough in television. I don't know why, because it takes a little bit more time to do, because to do point of view shots, you've literally got to restage the scene, get the actor out of the way, and put the camera exactly where the actor was. So that applies to the Doctor, to Rose, and also to the Dalek. I really wanted there to be a lot of point of view shots of the Dalek because it's very sinister. I wanted this kind of prism effect that the CGI people came up with that was very effective, I thought. Like with everything, almost every aspect of production, you go a little bit too far and you kind of pull it back. So when the rushes for that scene first went to people, I think everybody loved it because, principally because of Chris Eccleston. I mean, he just absolutely was on blazing form in that scene. So it was a very, you can see there were lots of shots and lots of possibilities, and would be very effective. When we cut it together, it was still good. But I remember Russell's objection was that I'd lent a little bit too heavily on the POV shots because I liked them so much, because I thought visually so extraordinary. And his point of view was, they're great, but I don't want to spend so much of that scene kind of emotionally in the consciousness of a Dalek, if you see what I mean, even though they're visually arresting. So he encouraged me to reduce the number of shots to what you've got in the final version, which is still very effective. I suppose rebalancing it a bit more to the Doctor and a bit more away from the Daleks. So
some of my favourite ever Eccleston shots are from your episodes, like in Bad Wolf when he's in the white room, the transmat room in the Big Brother house, and he extends his hand to Linda with a Y, and it's just there's no dialogue, it's just him with his hand outstretched. I think that's one of the best Eccleston shots.
But that's also because it's a point of view shot, and it's sometimes, again, why they don't often do them in TV and film is because it's sometimes slightly uncomfortable for the actors, because in that scene where he reaches his hand out, the reason for me why it's impactful is because he's reaching the hand out to Linda, but also absolutely to you as the audience, because the camera has been put in Linda's place. So in that scene, Chris is having to pretend that the camera is Linda, and if I just put Linda really close to camera, it wouldn't have the same effect. It's because it's looking right down the barrel of the lens, and of course that's what it's quite uncomfortable for actors, because it's the one thing they're trained never to do, is to look at camera.
Some standout shots from this confrontation, the camera zooming into the security camera, which is also zooming in, so it's a zoom on top of a zoom. This great wide shot of the bullet shells just bouncing off a nearby wall, showing how futile these weapons are as they just melt to the Dalek's shield.
I like directing as well because there's a lot of problem solving. Say, for example, there's a lot of gunfire in Dalek, and we found out quite early on that when a gunshot hits a Dalek, you want a spark. And it was just going to be prohibitively expensive and time-consuming to set up sparks for all the ways the Dalek was going to be shot. So that's when I think, I'm not sure, it might have been Ed the designer who came up with the idea of let's give the Dalek a force field so that the bullets melt before they get to the casing. So that was like a really kind of cool visual moment that came through a problem-solving thing, you know.
And of course, this incredible shot, which starts from an unnamed soldier shooting at the Dalek before panning around his shoulder to show his target. The glorious, triumphant, levitating, and already victorious Dalek. Like, two of my favourite shots of Dalek is the reveal of the Dalek when the lights come on, and then you pan over to the Doctor banging on the door to get out.
Yeah, I like whip hands.
And also, I think maybe my favourite shot is when the soldier is shooting at the Dalek, and then it pans around the soldier's shoulder to see the Dalek floating in midair. If you remember,
I was very proud of that shot, because that second one that you mentioned is the one where you're always trying to disguise how you're doing something and to disguise CGI. And bear in mind, back in 2004, when we probably did the post-production for that, CGI was a lot less common, a lot less flexible than it is nowadays. So it's much more of a big deal back then to be able to track the CGI in with the image. So when I was starting in TV and starting to do special effects, 15, 20 years ago, be encouraged by the CGI people to keep the camera as static as possible whenever you have an effect shot, because it's just, back then, it was much more difficult to track the image. What that meant was that it was much more easy to spot the CGI because you were just sat there looking at it. But if you can move the camera around while the CGI is happening, you can disguise it a lot more. I think, for example, the bit where the Dalek levitates, with the best will in the world, the CGI people were fantastic at the mill, and they got, I think, more money as the series went on. You could quite clearly see in some shots it's CGI and some that it isn't. But the best ones are where you're not really thinking about that and you're just in the story. And wherever the camera can help you kind of do that, I think it's, I think that's the best of both worlds.
And with just 3 shots of its weapon, the Dalek takes out this room of people. This Dalek could have killed them one by one, but it wanted to be as efficient as possible. It wanted to make a statement.
It wants us to see.
We then go to the Dalek wanting to speak to the Doctor, and during this one-to-one conversation, the camera does not cut back or even acknowledge Van Statten or Goddard in the room until the TV monitor turns off. This is all about the Doctor-Dalek relationship. The shots of the lonely Dalek surrounded by bodies being covered in water almost make you feel sorry for it. It's almost as if it's crying. And even though the two are in separate rooms, we have the Dalek looking towards camera right and the Doctor looking camera left. The Doctor screams for the Dalek to die, with him moving so violently that the camera almost doesn't keep up with him.
Alright then. If you want orders, follow this one. Kill yourself.
The Daleks must survive!
The Daleks have failed! Why don't you finish the job and make the Daleks extinct? Rid the universe of your filth! Why don't you just die?
You would make a good Dalek.
Seal the vault.
There's a scene where he's talking to the Dalek on the monitor, and the Dalek's in the rain. He's trying to convince the Dalek to commit suicide. Why don't you just make yourself extinct? Why don't you just die? And we had a problem with the focus on that scene for some reason that I can't remember, because the Doctor's walking towards camera as he's saying this line. We couldn't quite get it right, and we kept doing it. And Chris took the opportunity, again, brilliant actor, rather than complain there was a technical problem, he used the opportunity of doing more takes than perhaps would have been optimum to try things out and to go further. And so the take we eventually ended up using, I'm not sure if it was the last one or the penultimate one, was where he's so enraged, there's actually some spit coming out of his mouth. It's very shocking, and we left it in, and it got through, all the various approvals and whatever, and it gets much remarked on by people because it's, it's this moment of raw emotion, and it's also, again, someone who's a fantastic actor, this lack of vanity, because a lot of actors will say, well, I don't look quite nice in that shot, can we use it for a different one? That's not Chris. If it works for the show, then absolutely go for it. So I really love that.
The screen turns off, leaving the Doctor looking at a reflection of himself that's literally been darkened as he asks Van Statten to seal the vault. As the Dalek gives chase to Rose and Adam, we have this really efficient shot of the Doctor looking at the computer screen delivering exposition, whilst the audience is also shown Rose and Adam's progress through the building. However, it does a little too good a job at selling the speed of these two as they go up the stairs, and then we cut to the Dalek very, very, very slowly going up a single staircase. How the hell did this thing catch up with them?
We will explain later.
Rose soon finds herself stuck on the wrong side of the bulkhead door. She turns camera left to face the Dalek approaching from the left side of the corridor, and if Doctor Who Confidential is to be believed, this was the first scene shot with the Dalek of the revived series. We get further evidence of Ahern really being an actor's director as he frames Rose Tyler during this emotional phone call from the front with a close-up. Billie Piper is giving a terrific performance here, and Joe is determined to make sure that the audience sees that.
When you're shooting in mid-season or in the early season, you have time to rectify stuff. So, for example, in Dalek, there's the scene where Rose is running to get under the door and she misses it and she gets sealed in with the Dalek. It's going to exterminate her and she has a final conversation with the Doctor. That was a case in point where we were pressed for time and whatever and shot it in what I thought was the effective, time-efficient way. But the close-up of Rose doing her last scene to the Doctor was kind of semi-profile. So, when it went to the execs, I think Julie Gardner said, look, I think we really need, for that scene, because it's a really big scene, at that point in the series we hope the audience is going to believe that Rose is going to get chopped. You've really got to give her the best close-up that you can. And so a few days later, during the rest of the shooting, we got Rose back with the wall and whatever, and reshot what's in the show. Much nicer close-up of her, a bit tearful, you can see both eyes properly. That was very effective. So you can do that mid-season.
We're then put into the thought process of the Doctor as Rose's survival is not shown from her perspective. Instead, we hear what the Doctor hears. And then we spend a short amount of time with him reacting to this before we abruptly cut to Rose, who is just as surprised as the audience is that she's alive. Also, it's such a minor point, but I love how this whole exchange is just one shot.
Why are you doing this?
I am armed. I will kill. It is my purpose.
They're all dead because of you!
This next shot is really dynamic. Adam enters Van Statten's office in the background. The Doctor confronts him centre frame, and then they turn to the monitor off-screen facing the foreground. This shot uses depth in a really clever way, and it's a very economical way to shoot the scene as opposed to utilising multiple camera setups. We get a long establishing shot of the Doctor examining the uncatalogued alien weapons, which reminds me of an earlier shot of Adam's office. We have another POV shot of Rose looking at the Dalek's gun, emphasising how on edge the Dalek itself is in this elevator scene. We have a cool panning shot which follows the Dalek eye stalk from Van Statten to Rose to Van Statten again. Incidentally, I love how the blue glow from the Dalek eye stalk illuminates Rose's eyes. The Dalek and Rose head to the top floor with heavy shadows until it breaks a hole in the ceiling, allowing a strong beam of sunlight to illuminate the Dalek casing. We then get a mid-shot of the Dalek casing opening up to reveal the Dalek creature, but for a moment we don't get a proper look at the head from this angle. The next shot is Rose moving in for a better view, before the camera finally reveals the blue Dalek mutant inside, reaching for the sunlight. Let's talk about this reveal of the Dalek mutant. In the classic series, it was something that was rarely seen. We got glimpses of a hand there, or sometimes a claw here, with even our best looks being relegated to quick cuts, close-ups, and sometimes being obscured by someone's hands who's trying to claw the Dalek mutant off them. I think our best look in the classic series came from the Five Doctors, but this is something entirely different. This reveal is quiet, oddly intimate. This Dalek is clearly weak, and pretty meek and pathetic considering the destruction it's caused in this story. A lot of work went into creating this creature, and the great special effects work and animatronic work does not go to waste here. This is a proper head-to-toe, or brain-to-tentacle, reveal of what was just visually taboo in the classic series.
I'm sliming up our Dalek creature, so this is lovely methyl cellulose, which is nice, slimy, standard alien goo. The creature itself is made of silicon rubber. It's very soft silicon rubber. Inside, it's what we call a cable-controlled animatronic. So it's all basically like a bicycle brake cable. You pull a lever and something moves at the other end. And all these little levers, you pull something and pull a little wire and tentacles move and eyes blink. So it takes three of us just swinging about on these levers to make it work and bring it to life.
That, in fact, was a joke rubber Gorilla glove, which the makeup smeared Vaseline over it, and the glove was put on by the assistant floor manager, who, off the set, poked it under the tarpaulin and did the death twitch.
As the Doctor enters the scene, weapon aimed and ready to kill the Dalek and end the Time War, this conversation doesn't cut to the Dalek at first. This is a confrontation between the Doctor and Rose. The Doctor's weapon is aimed at her.
That thing killed hundreds of people.
It's not the one pointing the gun at me.
But aside from that, this is an incredibly simplistic scene, and that's not a critique. Let's break down the shot setups here. Basically, a setup is when the camera moves from one place to another to get a different shot. We have 1, a wide shot of the Doctor, 2, a close-up of the Doctor, 3, a wide shot of Rose and the Dalek, 4, a close-up of Rose, 5, another close-up of Rose but from another angle, 6, a mid-shot of the Dalek, which I think is only used twice, 7, a close-up of the Dalek, and 8, an extreme close-up of the Dalek. That's it. 8 setups for 3 characters. Oh, I'm losing my voice. Come on. We'll get there. We'll get there. And that's it. 8 setups for 3 characters, all of them static shots for this conversation, the linchpin for the emotional climax of this episode. So why does it land so hard? Why does this scene genuinely just make me tear up after rewatching it if it's structured so simply? Well, Joe just places the camera and lets the actors, the animatronics, and the music do their thing. For a director who is so great at moving the camera, creating dynamic framing and finding interesting angles, this climactic scene is so basic. The most abstract it gets is the zoom upon zoom, which you've seen from Ahern before, but even that emphasises the desperation of the Dalek.
Order my destruction! Obey! Obey! Obey!
But it just shows that despite everything I've talked about in this video, that at the end of the day, a director's job is to tell the story. And sometimes that means just sitting back, putting the camera down, and in its most basic form, just capturing the emotions of the actors as they read the dialogue.
The shots themselves are not particularly extraordinary. They're very straightforward shots. It's purely the conjunction of performance and music and script and, you know, hopefully the shots reflecting that. I do love when, you know, sometimes you can have, and I have done them, kind of these baroque shots where you've got the camera on the ceiling spinning around, or you do 360 pans or very long tracking shots. I do love all that stuff, but sometimes it can sometimes just be a close-up of an actor's face. You know, like Rose's father, Pete, realising that he's going to have to die in Father's Day, you know, and you stay on his face for an unusually long time for television, you know. So it can be the length of shot as much as, you know, a striking angle or anything like that.
And that seems like a nice note to end this video on, but there's more to this episode. As Van Statten is let go, I like the moving camera all the way down the corridor, which almost mirrors how Van Statten entered the episode, and then we end the episode where it started, in the museum corridor, where there's not much to say here, although I like how we never see the inside of the TARDIS here. Adam steps into the unknown, and that's how we end the episode.
Rose?
So, what have we learned here? Was there a particular scene that was either logistically or just for other circumstances on sets just very difficult to film? Was there a particularly difficult sequence in Dalek that took a long time to do?
It was all a nightmare. There wasn't an easy one.
The reason the script for this episode was so long, especially when compared to the script for the Heaven Sent video, wasn't just because I wanted to break down some of the tools of visual storytelling employed by Joe Ahern and the rest of the production team in Dalek, but I was also trying to break down the actual ethos behind Ahern as a storyteller, which included looking back not only at his previous directorial works, but also looking back at the classic series, which informs how the Dalek itself is depicted in this series and was also inspired by Ahern.
I can't be.
Because as much as we like to talk about objective criticism, or we like to pretend that media comes pre-made off an assembly line, we need to remember that actual people make this stuff. There's a reason this storyboard takes pride of place on my desk, and it's one of the reasons I started this series of videos. Though, talking to Joe Ahern, someone who directed episodes of Doctor Who Series 1, which was the series that basically got me into media, that was pretty awesome, so here's some more audio of that. So not to make everyone who listens to this feel old, but it would have been about 15 years ago where you were filming and working on Series 1. And of course that's another 15 years of experience that you've done. Is there, if you could go back in time in your own TARDIS and give younger you some advice on what to do, what advice would you give, and also to any other budding directors out there?
Oh, good question. Terrible question. Advice to me, get fit. It's directing is a stamina game, really. And I think someone said, I can't remember, some other famous director, you basically have to give up directing when your legs go. There's an awful lot of running around that you have to do, and you have to be quite, healthy. I mean, the last block of Doctor Who really finished me off physically. It was very, very, very full on. When you're coming up at the end stop of the series finishes here, the actors are going out of contract, you have no opportunity to pick things up at all. So you've got to get it right first time, and you've got no further overspill. So by the time it came to parting of the ways, there's a thing you do. Do you know what double banking is?
Yes, where two film crews are doing two different things at the same time.
Okay, so that's quite common in shows. Well, by the time we came to the end of Doctor Who, we were triple banking, and I was running 3 sets at the same time. So I'd be running from, for example, the Emperor Dalek. I'd be supervising the special effects shoot on that set. Then I'd be running to do an emotional scene between Rose and her mum in the TARDIS. And then I'd be running to get John Barrowman exterminated by a Dalek or whatever. And the last couple of weeks of Doctor Who was like that. So that was probably the most challenged I'd ever been as a director before or since, just because of the amount of high emotional, highly technical, highly fiddly stuff to do. And also because it's a show that everyone really loves. I think most people really loved working on. You really want to get it right. You really want to be trying to too much. As an example, when people get shot by a Dalek in the old series, sometimes I think they put the stunt people on wires. So when they get zapped by the Dalek, they're zapped with great force because someone gives a really yank on the wire. And we didn't have time to do that on Dalek because it was too time consuming. If you want to put an actor on a wire, you're just going to lose an hour, But we saved that. We did do that for John Barrowman's inverted commas death because he came back in Torchwood in Dalek. We put him on a wire and really kind of pulled back against the wall with great force. So even when you're up against it and you're running between 3 sets, you're still, there's this wall between you're trying not to cut corners. The reverse. You're trying to get every idea that you possibly think of in there because you want it to be the best it can possibly be. In terms of people getting into it, I mean, God knows, Doctor Who is one thing, but I'd been doing telly for about nearly 10 years before that. So when I was getting into TV, the business was so different. How I got into television isn't necessarily that relevant to people now. It also depends whether you get in through writing or directing. I mean, I definitely do. I do more writing than I do directing. Directing is what I'm interested in. I only ever started writing because I wanted to direct. So I'm a director who can write. I'm not really like a writer who wants to direct because they want to direct their own material. It's because when I started out in television, there was very little, I said I grew up on Doctor Who and Gerry Anderson and stuff like that. There was really none of that in the, very little of it in the 80s, 90s when I was trying to break in. And the only way I could do it was by writing it myself. So my advice would be, depending on whether you're a writer or not, I mean, I got in through writing, so that's one way of doing it. But if you're a director and you really want to direct stuff, you've got to direct stuff. The great stuff that you've got now is that it's both a plus and a minus. It's a plus in the sense that everyone's got access to editing software and cameras and even iPhone cameras. You can do movies on your iPhone now. That's great in one way. Not so great in another, which is when I was starting out, if you'd got a short film together and you'd got some 35mm stock or whatever actors, it was, it wasn't a big deal, but at least people would watch it because it was difficult to do that. Now, because it's so accessible, you've got to have other reasons to make people watch your stuff. So I suppose the advice would be, it's really hard and I can't do it. You sort of got to get out there. The temptation is because writing and directing and editing, which are the things that I'm mostly involved in, are ultimately they're quite solitary pursuits. Directing isn't actually my favourite environment, being on set, because it is very stressful and whatever. What I love doing is doing the stories, doing the storyboard, cutting it together, creating the whole thing, the sound effects and music. Those are the bits that I love, and they're mostly solitary pursuits, but none of that will get you a gig. The only thing that will get you a gig is actually getting out there and being with people. It's very hard if you're, as I am, quite insular and quite solitary. I don't really like meeting people, don't really like talking to people very much. I did a lot of art and storyboards and all that kind of stuff when I was younger. But you've really got to get out, not only meeting people who might give you a job, but also meeting people who can make stuff with you, because you can make a film on your own, but it's kind of pointless because you've got to reach out to more people. Having said this, if someone had given me this advice 20 years ago, I wouldn't have taken it, and I wouldn't take it now. I just know that you make it a lot easier for yourself if you create alliances with people, and maybe do what you're doing. I don't know much about your background, but you're doing essentially blogs on YouTube. You're talking about stuff. It's still quite rare. There starts to be more of it, but people talking about what a director does and how shots work and shot construction and whatever. People are obsessed with actors and celebrity and that kind of stuff. And people forget, or they don't really pay much attention to what directing is, particularly in television, where it's very much a producer's medium. So yeah, I would just say that. I mean, absolutely make short films, get them into festivals, but do stuff. If you feel that you're basically having your career or trying to start your career from your bedroom, you can do it, but it's just a lot more difficult, that's all. Obviously there are the media schools and the film schools and whatever. And the other thing I would say is get involved in something as early as you can, because a lot of people, they want to be, writer directors, and they think they can go straight from nowhere to being a writer director. And again, some people do and some people can. If you write a fantastic script or if you make a fantastic short film, you absolutely can do it and people can do it. But for most people, it's a bit of a slog. And the sooner you get out there, the better.
For me personally, because this is a great hobby that I enjoy doing, but my actual 9 to 5 is being a AD and a runner on TV sets. So that's kind of informed the stuff that I do.
I was going to say, that's exactly right. I mean, because a lot of people, they don't do jobs the point is to be on set or to be around those people, because if you're good and you're dedicated and you love your stuff, you absolutely will get noticed. I mean, I couldn't break in. I did short films and I did, directed some quite nice short films that people liked. But I didn't get anywhere until, for whatever reason, someone wanted me to write a script. And so I wrote a script, which they wouldn't let me direct. It was for a TV show. It was This Life, actually. And it wasn't really my wheelhouse because it was just, it's people in rooms talking. It was wonderful people in rooms talking. I mean, great actors and great scripts and whatever. But it wasn't really what got up in the morning as a director, because it's doing literally what I said I'm against, which is just following the actors around with a camera, right? But they were fantastic scripts. So I wrote a script, and after I've written a couple of scripts, they then let me direct some. Now, from my point of view, there is no connection between writing those scripts and being able to direct them. They are two completely different skill sets. But the fact that I've just been in a room with these people and they trusted me and they liked the scripts allowed them to give me a shot at directing, whereas I probably wouldn't have had it otherwise. So I think doing stuff like ADing and whatever and being on set, that is absolutely the key, or being in a production house and just seeing how those decisions get made while still, I was an editor for a long time and I edited some really boring, corporate videos and information videos. But while I was doing that, I was also, writing my own stuff and sending it out. The other thing I would say is it is a real stamina game. I mean, I went, a lot of the people that I knew 20 years ago who are not around because they've given up. And the ones who are still doing it and the ones who are doing it are the ones who just didn't give up. I mean, the amount of rejection you have to put up with is just unbelievable. You have to develop a very, very thick skin. That's the other thing.
Dalek is one of those stories that keeps getting better every time I watch it, and it's thanks to Joe Ahern's sublime work directing his actors, framing the Dalek, economic storytelling, and heck, let's just count down my personal top 10 favourite shots in Dalek. Number 10, the wide shot of the Doctor entering the Metaltron cage. Number 9, the wide shot which moves into a mid-shot as the Doctor, Van Statten and Goddard observe the power drain. Number 8, the mid-shot of the Dalek below the water sprinkler. Number 7, the close-up of Rose talking to the Doctor on the phone. Number 6, the wide shot of the Dalek elevating up the stairs. Number 5, the close-up of the Doctor with the Dalek chained up behind him. Number 4, the close-up of the soldier which pans across to a wide of the floating Dalek. Number 3, the POV shot from the Dalek's perspective of the Doctor. Number 2, the Dalek reveal which pans over to the Doctor at the door. And number 1, the extreme wide of the Doctor inside the Metaltron cage with the Dalek hidden in the shadows. Also, sorry to be boring, I'm aware that 4 of those top 5 are from the same scene. And I couldn't just have a chat with Joe Ahern in this series without asking him what his favourite shot was. do you have your own personal favourite shots where, like, either you saw it in the edit and thought that one's going on the show reel, or anything like that? Do you have your own favourite shots from the episode Dalek?
I'm trying to think. I like very much, I think it was my idea, a little gag that I put in, which I don't think was in the script. When the Dalek tries to shoot the Doctor with his gun at the very first scene, and the gun doesn't work, and I put a little double take in where the eye stalk looks down and the gun goes up. Do you know the bit I'm talking about?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's that coupled with the way that Chris does the laugh just after that. I mean, a real beautiful throaty laugh is quite hard to do convincing, I think. But it makes me laugh every time I see that.
It's not working. Fantastic! Oh, fantastic!
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time, Joe. Massively appreciate it. And as someone who has basically Doctor Who to thank for getting them in TV, and you're like involved in Series 1, so basically you are one of the grandfathers for my own career, basically. But it's been massively great talking to you.
Thank you. I wouldn't be in television without Doctor Who either, so there's a lot of us.
But what about you folks? What is your favourite shot in Dalek, and what other episodes or directors would you like to see me cover in the future? I would like to give a huge thank you to Joe Ahern for agreeing to be a part of this video and his agents for arranging the chat. I'd like to thank Chris Johnson for lending me all of the Dalek DVDs, as all of mine are in storage on the other side of the country, so without him this video would not have been possible. Thanks to Tom Bowen for making the snazzy background, and I'd also like to thank my patrons for supporting my content and making these in-depth videos possible. If you'd like to listen to the full hour-long chat I had with Joe Ahern that formed the backbone of this video, then you can gain access to that through my Patreon. I'd especially like to thank patrons Anne Neubauer, Dean Jones, Luna Day, Paul Warbeck, and Zachary Taylor. Thank you so much for watching this video about a story that is super close to my heart, and I'll see you folks next time.